Welcome back to the Best Worst podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Lewa. I'm super excited about this really special episode. I get a chance to invite my friend back, Jen Ellis. As you may remember from our February 21st of 2021 episode, Jen became famous pretty much overnight for gifting a pair of mittens to Senator Bernie Sanders, which went extremely viral. And so many memes were made. They circled the globe. Since then, that was 2 years ago, a lot has happened, including the release of her upcoming book, Bernie's Mitten Maker. I look forward to kind of diving in and catching up with my friend Jen. Welcome, Jen Ellis.
Thank you so much, Josh. It's great to be back.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to also seeing you in person in a little over a month. But, for the special episode, I kind of wanted to talk about a number of things. A lot of them have to do surrounding some of the themes that I read in your book. It's a wonderful book, folks. If you need to stop this episode and go get it right now or order it right now, you should go ahead and do that. But we're going to get into some of the kind of areas that really struck me. And one of the first ones we discussed 2 years ago was this idea of becoming famous. I think of, at times in my life, I wanted some sort of fame. I don't know why, but it was something. And whenever I would tell friends that I wanted to be famous, some people would say, like, I would never want to be famous. And here you are, you're a person in front of me who's lived that. And so I'm just kind of curious about, I know you discussed this in the book, but if you could talk about kind of that experience that you had with sudden fame.
Sure. I mean, sudden fame, I think also, like you, when I was little, there were definitely moments where I was like, oh, it'd be great to be a movie star and it'd be so glamorous. But that's not exactly how it feels. It's actually kind of scary. I think I compared it in the book to this experience I had in Alaska where this whale swam underneath a canoe I was in. It was very scary. It felt like at any moment things could go dramatically wrong. And the internet is very unpredictable. People can turn against you in a dime, or they could promote you in millions of ways, overnight, which is what happened to me. But I always felt as it was happening that at any moment it could turn sour. And it felt really scary because, I think like lots of people, other people's opinions of me matter, whether or not I like that or want that to be true. It is true. And I want to be liked. And so I was so flattered that this great big thing was happening and it was so positive, but it was extremely scary that at any moment it could turn nasty. There are a lot of trolls out there, and I was really afraid that they would come after me.
Yeah, Senator Bernie in the book gave you some really great advice about kind of not reading comments, and were you able to stick to that at all?
Pretty much. He said, don't Google yourself. He said, I don't, and I suggest you don't either, because you could get lost in the rabbit hole of the internet and trying to figure out what all these anonymous people think of you. And yeah, he said, don't Google yourself. Try not to look at the news too much. And I do follow the news, and I know he does too. But I think you do have to sort of set some boundaries around what you're looking for and what you want to know. And, that is a privilege that I have as a white person, as a middle-class person. Like, I can set some boundaries around what I'm exposed to. And, I think I've recognized a lot of my privilege through this experience. And I've tried not to Google myself. I have since a little bit, in writing the book, I had to do some fact checking in which I found some interesting information.
Well, yeah, you probably have one recollection of your life, and then to be able to look it up, to make sure you can clarify, am I remembering it the way I did? I kind of want to go back to this idea about this whale, because that was a really vivid, incredible story about you and your brother, and going for the shrimp pots in Alaska. And and this ominous, foreboding creature, majestic, beautiful creature, this whale underneath your canoe, and with the power to either woo and wow you or to destroy you. And that, to me, your kind of connection with that and fame really kind of stands out. It seems really sublime, both beautiful and terrifying at the same time. I can imagine. So as you transition over the last couple of years, you write this incredible book. And I've spent 2 days with this book. It was an easy read. I described it to Jen folks as watching a really great movie. Somehow you really composed this story about your life in so many different ways. And I'm just curious about what inspired you to write this book.
Well, I think in the moment when all of this was happening, right after the inauguration, it just felt so unbelievable to me. It was so surprising. Every turn was, I was in vogue and people from all over the world were calling me. And it just, to go from living a really normal life as a school teacher, as a mom, as a partner, as a community member, to all of a sudden this extraordinary thing happening, I wanted to write it down. I wanted to remember it. And also I kept pinching myself, being like, is this real? Because sort of like with that whale analogy, the crazy thing with the whale is the surface of the water never changed. And that's the same thing with my life, right? Like the day after the inauguration, my alarm went off like every other day. I got up and I went to work. And so there were so many things on the surface that just seemed like they were absolutely the same as they had been the day before. And yet this huge thing was happening underneath the surface. And so I wanted to write it down. And then I was having a lot of trouble sleeping. And I think that writing was a way to sort of empty my brain of all of those thoughts because I had so many thoughts racing through my mind. And I wanted to keep my family safe. I think that that was a big thought that people were knocking on the door, people were calling me on the phone, people were finding me online, people were sending me things to my home address and to my school address. So it just felt like I had been found. And I kind of didn't like that. And so I had a lot of racing thoughts and I wanted to get them out. And so if I couldn't sleep at night, I would sit down at my computer and I'd start just telling the story of the day or of a conversation I had. A lot of the conversations in the book, I mean, it's interesting where nonfiction memoir meets fiction, which is sometimes your memory. And because I had to reconstruct conversations that I had had, and of course that is a little bit fictional because it's an approximation of my memory of what was said. But those conversations that I wrote about that were happening in the second part of the book, which happens after the inauguration, they were pretty close to accurate because I was writing them down basically the night after they happened. I was writing the book as it happened. And then the first half of the book, which talks a lot more about my childhood and my life before the inauguration, my marriage and all of that stuff, my journey to motherhood. A lot of that is more like based on memory and those are more like approximations of those conversations. But yeah, I think that I just was like, after a while, I had been writing so much that it was like I had 4 or 5 chapters, 100 pages. And then our mutual friend Sarah Taxler had this friend from school, from elementary school, who was an agent. And so he and I worked together to try and get the book published for about a year. And so he was also very encouraging. He wanted the book to be published. He was a wonderful agent. It didn't end up getting published in that way, but or with him. But I think that his encouragement was very motivating. Because I was like, here's this guy who actually knows what he's talking about. I've never published anything,
Right.
but here's a guy who's like, you're a good writer. You have a good story. Keep writing this book. And he's actually the first person I think in the acknowledgments. He was the first person who just legit said, from a professional standpoint, you have a book here. You need to write it. And I was like, wow, okay, that's what I'm going to do.
It's hard to read the book and see you as a first time writer or somebody who would ever doubt that. But I guess it does make sense. It's a new area. You've been teaching for 17 years. You'd done Teach for America before that, and transitioning to really almost what people would consider a profession. I could see kind of being an outsider and having some, I guess, imposter syndrome. But on the other hand, I can imagine how therapeutic it would be to write. I mean, even journaling is such a great way to download what's going on in your brain as life becomes overwhelming, let alone the time that you were having in your life with all the changes, people showing up to your front door. I mean, the sense of safety and exposure that you must have had to be struggling and dealing with. And writing to me sounds like it was a perfect way to address this. What came from your book is something that's truly inspiring and deeply inspiring. And I think so many people are going to gain so many different things from it because there are 1,000 lessons in your book, all somehow connected, like a tapestry, interestingly enough. I kind of want to talk to you about one of the people in your book who I actually cried at this moment when I read this book. I'll hold it together now as we record, but I cried several times as I kind of texted you the other day, but many times. But Danny. So Danny is a person, when you were an undergrad, who truly saw you. Mm-hmm. Now, you had to be brave and you had to open up to Danny, but Danny truly saw you. And I want to talk about, what does that mean to have a relationship with somebody who really can see you?
Yeah. I mean, Danny, Danny is one of the first people I came out to. I think she is the first person I came out to just wholeheartedly. I dabbled a little bit, like I'm thinking about this, but Danny was someone who worked for the Office of Student Life at the University of Vermont, and she happened to be the advisor of an honor society that I was in, and she worked in the student life office, and I was a work study there, and it just seemed like I kept running into Danny. And then she was the director of orientation, and after my freshman year I was an orientation leader, so I gave tours to students and helped them sign up for classes. And anyway, we spent a lot of time walking around this beautiful university campus in the spring with all the flowers, and one night Danny and I were walking along, and I ended up just having this overwhelming urge to come out to her because she was out. And she was the first time she had a kind of life that I thought, wow, she has a kid, she's married, she has a house, she has kind of what I want out of life. And yeah, when you say she saw me, it's so true because I feel like, it takes one to know one sometimes. And I think probably what she saw in me was some version of one of her past selves. And that's probably true because I'm about the age now that she was when I met her. Maybe I'm a little older than she was, but I think when we meet someone who's traveling through a time that we've kind of been through, coming out or going through something, it's sort of like you want to open up some communication to folks like that and be like, hey, what you're going through is something that I'm familiar with, and if you need someone, I'm here for you. And most of the times people are like, oh yeah, thanks. But man, I really did need Danny, and our stars crossed right when I needed her. And I've always been really thankful to her. She's also someone who continued to kind of follow me through my university career. And, I would check in with her and be like, I'm thinking about this. What do you think about this? Or sometimes I would just go and be like, Danny, I made a huge mistake. And I feel like a huge dirtbag or, and she'd be like, yeah, that's a learning opportunity right there. She just was so wise. And I still feel like if I happen to see Danny, I could just sit down with her and just have a huge heart to heart, even though I haven't spoken to her in a long time. Although I did contact her about this book and tell her that she was in the book and asked her if she wanted to have a pseudonym. And she was like, nope, I'm pretty sure that you're just going to tell a story as it happened. And, you know, you can just use my name because I was literally there.
Yeah. Yeah. Just her presence in your life was that such an important, impactful moment, for you and her willingness just to take extra time to sit down with you and to provide space for you to open up and share and for her to listen and to be fully present. It's something that I was just having this conversation yesterday actually about trying to be fully present for the people that I'm with and how, we kind of get to this point where we live our lives where, we're rushing to the next thing, or I'm thinking about what's next weekend's plans, or this vacation is coming up, and I'm constantly thinking about what's next. And the idea that Danny could look at you, be right in the moment, see you fully, and be present with you is something that I've really been trying to do a little bit more. But your book really, really drove it home. I was hanging out with a couple of kiddos yesterday, and I just remember one of them was telling me some random story about something, and my brain was starting to wander off towards something else and thinking, this child needs my attention right now. And so I stopped and I looked at him in his eyes, and he looked up at me, and he was paying attention that I was fully there. And that's a memory that he's going to remember about me. It's the biggest gift of being fully present for people, really seeing them. So, I thank you to Danny. So I have there's other countless people in your story. Mrs. Cordell, of course, who was your teacher, who was an economics teacher, actually, who was teaching you the sewing class. And there's many lessons that obviously flow out of that and that come back around. But I'm kind of curious about this metaphor. I as an artist, when I would draw or paint, I had to get okay with the idea of people getting what they needed from the piece, right? So if somebody told me one thing that they saw from it, I used to get offended or upset. But then I realized, you create, people get. Maybe there's a message in there may be something, but people get what they need from it. And so one of the messages I got from you is sewing as a bigger metaphor, right? And so I don't know for you if there's any connection with that at all, if that resonates with you at all. But for me, it's this idea of the little imperfections being a part of life and making something truly unique and beautiful, or the tapestry of putting together a quilt, having the uniqueness of somebody's story or people's lives within that quilt. And so I'm kind of curious from you if that's something that was motivating you behind your overall experiences with sewing.
I don't know if that is what motivates me in sewing, but I do think that is one of the results of sewing. And I think when I sit down to sew something, I don't always know exactly why I'm going to do that. I know now that sewing brings me a lot of peace, but I'll go down into the basement and I'll tool around and find a bunch of fabrics, and then I'll find a bag of fabrics that I'd set aside for something special. And I won't be able to remember what it was that was special, but then I'll be like, well, actually, right now is just as special of a time as any. So then I start making something. And then, yeah, ultimately, when you're sewing things like a quilt, unless you go to the fabric store and buy all new fabric, which I almost never do, your quilt is a combination of lots of different fabrics from different projects or hand-me-downs or yard sales or whatever. And so it does end up being this amalgamation of many stories, whether that was your intent or not. I think there's that piece. And then there's also this other piece of particularly through writing the book, I really came to know that my pattern in life is when things are really stressful and when things feel lost or out of control, or I feel really angsty, sitting down at the sewing machine and creating something helps me to get out of that, or it helps to calm down whatever feels really out of control or buzzy in my brain. It just, and then in the end, you have something beautiful, either a pair of mittens or a quilt, or you've hemmed some pants that you meant to hem for ages. And it's a form of art and creativity. And I think that those folks who have found a creative outlet know what I'm talking about. It doesn't have to be sewing. It could be any kind of artistic expression. There is a healing component to it that is hard to describe, but is so real.
Yeah. Yeah, that healing through the creative process was one of the notes that actually I'm looking at right now, and I think we're on the same wavelength, there. I also do want to talk a little bit about Mrs. Collette. There's this thread about her coming into your life at a very well. First of all, I love reading the stories about you sneaking out of class and walking home, and then finding a workaround in the process, and the precocious child that you were. But at this later stage of your life, when you went through this extremely traumatic experience, and here comes this, and you had changed, and you were going through a lot, and internalizing, and probably as an adult, it would be difficult to deal with things, but as a child, trying to make the sense of the world. And here comes this person, Mrs. Collette, who teaches this class. And there's a quote that you put in the book about something to the effect of the power to make a child's life better, right? And teaching being a place where, is a very important place where you can make a child's life better. But there's also this other moment where the kids say to you, we're thanking you because we love you, Miss Ellis. And again, these are all points in the book of this world of education and training and giving and serving. And so I'm kind of curious from you. I know you've transitioned into this new stage of your life, but I'd love for you just to reflect on your education experience and the impact that educators had on you and the impact that I believe you've had on children.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you to teachers everywhere. Now that I'm not teaching anymore, I feel like I can just shamelessly say teachers are saints. They're a gift to the world. I mean, it's amazing what teachers do. And unless you've been in the classroom, been in a school, and you've gone through that, it's hard to know the millions of things that teachers do every year to make the lives of students better. And also, most of the kids you come in contact with, you don't know what their struggles are. Mrs. Collette didn't know what was going on in my life, that I had struggled terribly with awful things that had happened in my childhood, and that I had arrived in her room just a mess. She didn't know that she was giving me an enormous gift of teaching me how to sew. In fact, when I contacted her after the inauguration, she didn't even really remember me. She was like, "Oh yeah." And I had sent her a pair of mittens, but she admitted she couldn't quite place me, which is totally fine. And I think that she's taught hundreds and probably thousands of people, and but you just never know what struggles people are showing up with, what's on their mind, what's in their heart. Talking about trying to be fully present, it is a gift to be fully present with other people, because it means that you can put everything else aside to just be in this moment. But children so often, you think they're fully present with you, but in the back of their mind, they might be replaying this terrible thing that happened, and you never know. And so yeah, I will freely say that most of the time I probably never knew what was going on with my students, unless they told me, or unless I guessed or put some pieces together. And I knew that from a pretty early time in my career, that students were presenting with all kinds of things that I would never know. And so I tried to with every decision I made, to think about what could be the kindest thing for me to do right now, and I brought a lot of my own teachers, my teachers from childhood and from middle school and high school. I brought so many of them into the classroom with me, because teachers learn from teachers.
Yes.
And it's you never just show up with all the gifts of teaching. You show up with all the gifts of every teacher who's ever taught you. And so I would, sometimes I would just meet a really tough student, and And sometimes students just really push your buttons, and sometimes they're really hard to love. And there was this little placard that I kept on my desk that said something like, the students who need your love the most will ask for it in the most unlovable ways.
Oh, wow.
And I tried to carry that with me in every interaction. That, like, if I had a student showing up who was really struggling, I tried to interpret that as a request for love. You know, like, students are going to ask for things in all kinds of ways, but the ones who need you the most are going to be the hardest ones to reach. And sometimes I was never successful. Like, I tried in a lot of ways with some students and I didn't get there. But there were some students who, have reached out to me, especially after this inauguration thing, the mitten thing, and have thanked me, and have told me now that they're adults how they remember me and what I meant to them. And I can see in retrospect how some of those very small decisions I made to just respond with love and kindness meant so much to those kids. I think for those students who I didn't reach, and there were some, I just hoped that when they left my classroom that they ended up in the arms of another teacher who would reach them in the way they needed to be reached. Because as humans, we can't reach everyone. But if we're trying to reach a lot of people, we can do that. And we can also hope that whoever we don't reach, is reached by someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think when I was getting trained to be an educator, there was a perspective from some people that there's such thing as bad kids and good kids. And I remember learning that there's no such thing as a bad kid.
No.
People go through a lot of experiences, some that we can never even imagine. They bring their own life stories and traumas, but I love the humility of saying, like, you didn't reach them all, you can't reach them all, but we could try, and we could show love, we could show attention, and that's been my experience, especially working with K through 12. Anytime I work with K through 12, especially some of the more, the kids who had more troubling behavior. My early days would be to try to be firm and the big person in the classroom, and learning that after some time and some experience, learning that if I really opened my ears and opened my eyes and looked and listened, I could see something else. And I think what I found in my experience really matches with what you found, was that there was a need there. And I was the one chosen to be in their presence, and so I was going to do my best to try to meet that. And there were some fun stories, some tough ones, but there were some really sweet stories. And I appreciate also your creativity with the outdoor classroom and all the different things. But one of the things about, you kind of illustrating with some of the students who reached out to you and told you about your impact on their lives is, and this kind of actually connects with the fame conversation earlier, because there was a price you paid for having this overnight fame, with the loss of privacy and the internet being, having the potential to be a pretty tough place. But there's this other ripple effect that happened that touched lives way beyond what I think maybe I don't know if you could even imagine that you would touch these lives. And here's what I think of, and please be patient with me on this one. I think of a quote, 10 new jobs, 10 new jobs, 10 new jobs. I think of $3,000, $5,000, $15,000, $56,000. I think of millions of dollars now being raised, all connected to a simple gesture of giving a pair of mittens to Senator Bernie Sanders. And so, yeah, there's a price, and there's also, a gift. And I'd love to kind of hear from you about your thoughts around the ripple effect of kind acts, and how you experience that.
Yeah, I mean, the 10 jobs thing, that gets me every time, because if you have ever been the person who's gotten a phone call from someone saying, "Hey, you got the job." You want this job, and like you put yourself out there and someone picked you. And a job is not just being chosen, but it's like a job is a way to feed your family. It's a way to provide for yourself and for those you care about. Jobs mean so much to people. And when I went and toured the Vermont Teddy Bear factory, and we walked down this aisle, and there were folks sewing mittens and designing mittens and cutting wool and sorting wool. And the woman who was giving me that tour said, this partnership has created 10 new jobs in our factory. And I was like, you mean like you moved 10 people over from making teddy bears to making mittens? And she was like, no. I mean, we hired 10 new employees, and they are full-time jobs with benefits, with vacation, with paid vacation, getting paid a livable wage. And most of those jobs went to new Americans in our area. And 10 new jobs was something I could quantify that made everything worth it. And sorry, I'm like tearing up because I still see the women at that factory, and I don't even know if they know who I am. I was actually just there a few days ago filming a little news thing, and I don't know if they know who I am, but I know who they are, and I'm so thankful for them, and and I'm so happy for them. And they don't ever need to know who I am, but whenever I see them, I'm just happy for them that this thing that I did, and had almost no thought, giving mittens to Bernie Sanders was just sort of like, oh, cool, that's a kind of a fun thing to do. And then to be presented with sudden internet fame and to not really know what to do with it, but to just sort of steer by intuition and try and make the best decisions as I went along. But yeah, that decision to partner with the Vermont Teddy Bear Factory so that they could make the mittens, because 22,000 people reached out to me in the end. And there was no way I could make all of those mittens for everybody. And even if I tried and tried to sell mittens to people, they would turn around and sell them online for, so much more. People were just trying to, I mean, people who actually had mittens that I had made were selling them online, and authentic Jen Ellis mittens, never worn, selling for $1,000. People should not spend $1,000 on mittens unless it's for charity. And so, yeah, the partnering with Vermont Teddy Bear Factory was one of the best things that I did. And it made perfect sense. A Vermont company, they employ people I know. Um, and it wasn't always easy, right? Like, I'm not a business person really. I had this sort of like side hustle of selling mittens at craft fairs in Vermont. I'm not like a corporate kind of person. So I had to hire a lawyer to help negotiate a contract. But one of the things I felt really strongly about is, I want this partnership to benefit a lot of people. And so what we decided in that partnership was that a percentage of every sale of mittens would go to a nonprofit. And at first it went to Make a Wish Vermont, which was great. It went to them for the first year. And then the second nonprofit was Outright Vermont, which is an organization that serves queer youth in the state. And they have groups and support groups. They do all kinds of great work. And so they have been the recipient of a percentage of every sale for the last year. And we're going to keep working with them for another year. And so when I set out to partner with Vermont Teddy Bear, my mind was in, the money from this could help a nonprofit. And I guess it just never occurred to me that it would create those jobs. Um, or that it would be so lucrative. I mean, it's like usually one of their best-selling products. People love these mittens, and everyone can get them. It's not, that was the other thing, is I didn't want to have some sort of exclusivity around the mittens. Like, if you want mittens, please, please buy mittens. Buy them from Vermont Teddy Bear Factory. Go onto their website, get mittens, and know that a portion of every sale goes to help queer youth in Vermont. And I mean, it's just a situation where everybody wins.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you partnered with. I mean, I know you did just through reading the book, the amount of vetting you did for all the offers you received from companies and what would work and what wouldn't work. That Vermont Teddy Bears actually is a company that was in alignment with you from a values perspective, had the capacity to meet the needs of the demand, and also had this idea of the service orientation, right? This ability to give and this willingness to give, and I think that it's made for a magical partnership. It can be people can still go to vermontteddybear.com to find those gloves or the mittens as well, and so I think this is a great time to do it as we move into spring, but still, I think knowing that you can invest in something that's there for a great cause. All right, so I have a couple of more things that I wanted to ask you here. The one is about this concept that that you really pulled together really nicely about generosity. And how our traditional approach to looking at generosity is writing a check to an organization or giving $1 to somebody on the street who needs some help. But you really blew that wide open. And so would you mind talking a little bit about this concept of generosity?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I used to equate generosity with giving something away, and that when you give something away, you don't have it anymore, whether it's money or goods or whatever. But I think it harkens back to your what you were talking about of being fully present, right? Like if you can be fully present with someone, you are generously giving of yourself. It doesn't cost you anything, but there are so many ways that we can give our time, our generosity of spirit, even just like something as simple as like someone cuts you off in traffic, and instead of wailing on your horn and giving them the finger, you could just slow down and say, you know what, I bet that person was in a hurry, and or maybe they just made a wrong decision and didn't really gauge how close you were to them. If you could just assume the best of people, ooh, that could make everyone's days so much better. And I think there's this other piece of me that has been really grappling with the idea that everybody is doing the best they can. And sometimes it's really hard to actually believe that when you're like, whoop, your best could be a lot better. But if you remove that judgment and you think, this morning I woke up and I thought, I'm going to do the best I can with what I know, with what I have, with the amount of sleep I had, with the amount of food I have. I'm just going to do the best I can. Most people, that's how they wake up. Most people don't wake up in the morning and think, today I'm going to be a jerk. People don't necessarily think that, I don't think. And so if you assume that everybody else is doing the best they can, that is a form of generosity that you can give anybody. Just the benefit of the doubt. Slow down, let somebody in to traffic. You know, if you make a mistake and someone gives you the finger, just wave and say, hey, I'm sorry. I think that we have lost in our society some of those really gentle, human like qualities that make living in the world a more peaceful place.
Absolutely. I think it's a great charge to challenge people with um, giving people the benefit of the doubt, assuming the best in people, that they're doing their best at that moment, which has been hard for me in the past as well. But
So hard.
yeah. I mean, now more than ever, when I think about my worst days, I think, oh, that was the best I could do. I mean, I'm at that moment, and I can assume that that's the same for other people as well.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in with one more thing,
Please.
like, that is a piece of generosity you can give yourself. Whew, I need to do that myself. I need to forgive myself for so many mistakes that I've made. And I think it's sometimes easier to give other people your generosity of spirit and to forget about yourself. But, forgiving yourself for all those little mistakes and moving forward with doing the best you can. It's like that quote, you how does it go? You you do better when you know better, something
Hmm.
like that, you
Hmm.
know? when you know better, you'll do better.
That's right. That's right. Maya Angelou. So I know we're getting ready to wrap up here. I just want to say that, Jen, this book, I shared this with you before, but well written, great structure, incredible stories throughout the book. This book is heartwarming. It's heartbreaking. It's laugh out loud funny at moments. It's that all of that is wrapped into this book. This story truly reads like a quilt of your life, made up of many relationships, experiences, and more. And the fun thing about it is that we get to see it real time, right? We got this book that really kind of takes a snapshot of a bunch of experiences, and we get to stay connected to you and connect with you along the way. So just a couple more questions about how people can get access to the book. When's the book being released? And Mittens or anything else that you'd love to share about?
Sure. So the book will be released on May 2nd. I very much encourage folks to pre-order it if they can. I am publishing with a small independent Vermont press, and so the first run is only 2,500 copies. And so I do encourage folks to pre-order if they can. But May 2nd is 8 days from now. And I know when this podcast comes out, it'll probably be actually right around May 2nd. So
Yeah.
I encourage folks to purchase it from a local independent bookstore. That would be my preference, to support local independent bookstores. And if you can't get it from a local independent bookstore, then there are online places. It's available everywhere. It's going to be pretty easy to order. And if you like it, feel free to reach out to me or, write a review. I'm on social media. My Twitter handle is VT Awesomeness, which, is something I picked long before I became internet famous. I'm also on Instagram at Jen Ellis Vermont, all spelled out. I think that's it. I know I should get on TikTok, but I haven't figured that out yet. But yeah, I'm out there. Folks can also send me private messages on Facebook. And when I wrote the book, my therapist, somebody came up to me and was like, that thing that happened to you in chapter 2, that happened to me too. And I was like, hey, you want to go for coffee and we can chat about it if you want. My therapist was like, you're going to be having a lot of coffee if you offer that to everybody who wants to talk to you about that. But I think I've gotten a lot of healing from reading other people's memoirs. And if folks want to reach out to me, like, I'd be happy to respond, because I think that that's one of the things that makes this world a better place is that human connection. So yeah, the book comes out May 2nd, and I hope folks read it, and I hope they like it as much as you did.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Jenna. For listeners, the first 5 listeners who email me at jw@bestworstthingpodcast.com, I'll get you I'll order a book for you. So just email me at jw@bestworstthingpodcast.com for the first 5 emails that I get, and you'll get yourself a free copy of Bernie's Mitten Maker from Jen Ellis. Jen, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Josh. I appreciate you too.
Thank you for listening to the Best Worst Thing podcast. I'm your host, Josh Willow. Music is produced by Josh One. You can follow him at Boom Note on Instagram and Twitter, and Josh One on Spotify. Our episodes are edited by Cooled Jets Music. You can follow him at Cooled Jets Music on Instagram. Our marketing is designed by Francesca Daniels. You can find her at FrankandKitty24 on Instagram. And our overall design is by Inspired Design with Ryan Daniels. You can find them at getinspired.design on Instagram. Thank you for listening to The Best Worst Thing.
This one's for the